Today we'll have a special treat in our biblical buffet, and it probably needs some additional explanation. So last time, if you follow our, what's that, not a podcast, webcast, whatever, if you follow our channel, let's start over. We try to upload lessons for so-called Old Testament lectionary reading in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod calendar, liturgical calendar. So, last time it was a Resurrection Day. But if you look in the calendar for Resurrection Day, we have at least two services. We have a day service, and the reading was Jeremiah 31. That's what you, our dear watchers and listeners, were able to enjoy last week. But there is also early morning one, and the early morning for this year is actually Exodus 14:10 to 15:1. Okay, so that's what we're kind of making a step back, and we're doing this. One of the reasons for this kind of, I don't want to messed up situation, but the reason is we do not have Old Testament readings for next few weeks till we reach celebration of Pentecost. So we will have this reading today. It's plenty of verses. We'll kind of soldier through. And then I have an idea that maybe we will implement. So stay tuned. Every week we'll come up with something really cool. So after unrelated to text explanation, let us go into the text. So first, let's have some introductory remarks. We need to see this story, this crossing of the Red Sea story, within the larger context. In the book of Exodus, we have stories that can be brought together. It doesn't mean that by no means I want you to think or believe that the book of Exodus was put together by some kind of editor that took one story from this fairy tale and then another story from another fairy tale and so on and so forth. No. But if you see the whole narrative, there are like big chapters and the smaller blocks within the chapters. Okay, so there is an Exodus, what I would call Exodus narrative. Okay, that starts in 1317. So when people actually leave Egypt, okay, the first when Pharaoh let people go, God did not lead them on, and so on and so forth. So they are leaving Egypt, and it ends at 19:2 when they arrive on the third new moon after people of Israel had got out of the land of Egypt. On that day came to the wilderness of Sinai. They set out of Rephidim and came into wilderness of Sinai, and they encamped in the wilderness. Boom. That's the end of the block. So they leave, they arrive. So the whole passage is till, I would say even 8. Okay, 19:2-8, the first part of verse 2. And it has 7 parts. We can roughly identify them as this. Has chiastic structure. So that means the parallel blocks are like the narrative develops toward the center, and then you have a similar parallel passages going through. So 13, 17 to the end of the chapter, which is verse 22. And then that's the okay, leaving Egypt. Okay, and then the parallel to that, as I already said, is the actually 18:1 to 19:2 arrival to Sinai. Okay. B would be victory, or let's start with verses 14:1 to 15:21. Victory over Egypt, or Egyptian army, but we'll talk about that. Parallel to that, actually very interesting, in the second part of chapter 17, so 17:8 to 16, we have victory over Amalekites. Okay? There are parallels here. I mean, first of all, in both cases that we will see here today, Moses raises his hand or hands. Okay? As we know, I mean, this is not the first time. I mean, if you read it first time, I'm very pleasured to introduce this wonderful story to you if you have never heard it. But if you know the story, you know what will happen. I mean, they will come to the sea, Egyptians will be right behind them, and then God will tell him, stretch out his hand, and the waters will become like walls, and they will go in between. And so Moses stretches his hand, and at the very end, we will have two memorial songs. Kind of look like one, but it's actually two. One that is Moses singing, and then another one that Miriam, even with the similar words, the Miriam commands them to sing. Okay? Over here, again, the victory over Amalekites was reached not because the genius of army commander, who was Joshua, but the victory was achieved because Moses was holding his hands in the prayer posture toward the Lord. And then they have two memorials. So two songs here, two memorials here. Blocks C and C prime. So it is, 15, 22, 27. We have water problem. Okay? And we have water at Morah. And on C prime, chapter 17, verses 1 to 7, we again are looking for water. Okay? And in between, in the middle, basically the whole chapter 16, we have manna and quail. Okay? So that's the flow of the whole story, and we have some verses within this second block. Okay? That's one introductory remark that I need to make so you will understand the context of the passage. Sometimes it is very important. Okay, another thing that we need to talk about is very interesting feature that we find in the Bible. When there is a person who embodies the whole nation, and we see this happen. So what I'm going to is what happened with Moses before this crossing of the Red Sea now start to happen to the whole nation of Israel. For example, let me show you. So let's have these two colors, and we will have Moses here and Israel here. Okay? And we're all in the book of Exodus. Okay? In 2:3. Okay? We know, let's find it. In 2:3, Moses is saved through the water, and his daughter, I'm sorry, not his daughter, his sister, actual older sister, she put the child, actually his mom, sorry, my bad. So his mom actually put the child, in verse 3, she put the child in the basket and placed it among the reeds. Okay, so he is saved through the water within the reeds. That's where daughter of Pharaoh finds him. That's where she takes him out of that stuff, and so on and so forth. In our situation, in Exodus 13:18, in most of the Bibles, ESV is not an exception. Oh, sorry, I should have used another color. So ESV is not an exception. What we have is, but God led people around the way of the wilderness toward Red Sea. Okay? But I don't know who made this scribal mistake. In Hebrew, the title is the Sea of Reeds. Okay? So now Moses was saved through reeds, and they will be saved through reeds. Okay? After that, it's not only to our passage, but after that, we know when we compare Exodus 7:7 with Acts 7:23, which says that Moses spent, it's a wonderful sermon of Stephen, actually very interesting. You might want to read it someday. It will give you some additional knowledge on Israel history. So, when he was 40 years old, it came to his heart to visit his brothers, the children of Israel. He means Moses. So he was 40 years old when he kind of walked out of the palace and decided to visit his brothers. And when we compare it to Exodus 7:7, we know he was 80 years old. So he spent 40 years in the wilderness, in between these times. And we know, okay, that Israel was wandering through the wilderness for 40 years. Okay? There is one more thing. It is very interesting that Lord first appeared to Moses in Mountain Horeb. Okay? And it is the same mountain with a different name. It's called Sinai. Okay? So he came as the end of his preparation. He came to Horeb, which is Sinai, and then Israel came for the covenant into the very same geographical place. It is interesting how the leader, the head of the nation, goes through similar previous experience that later nation will go through. Sometimes it is vice versa. Sometimes you have nation going through something and then somebody kind of embodies the history. And if you look at the life of Jesus, you can really see some parallels with what was going on with Israel in the previous history. So with these kind of short introductory remarks, let us go into the passage itself. And we'll just read it, and I will leave, some comments on the margins. So 14:10. So we have few pretty obvious blocks, passages. So we'll go through 14:10 to 14. then 14, 15 to let's see, 18, and then 14, 19 to 20, I believe. 20, and then we'll have 14, 21 when we'll talk about mostly we'll talk about Egyptians and things like that. 25, and then 14, 26 to 29, and then 14, 30 to the end of the chapter, which will be 31, and then I'll say a couple words about 15, chapter 15, verse 1. So let's read it. When Pharaoh drew near, the people of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them, and they feared greatly. The people of Israel cried out to the Lord, and they said to Moses, "Is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us in bringing us out of Egypt? Is it not what we have said to you in Egypt, leave us alone when we may serve the Egyptians? For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness." And Moses said to the people, "Fear not, stand firm, and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent." Okay, so that's our first part, and that's very interesting. We have few very interesting things going on here. First of all, in verse 10, when Pharaoh drew near, it's a technical term that we can pronounce as a korban. Well, actually, the verb is. We find this later on in Leviticus chapter 1, verse 2. What we usually have, and it's not the only place, it's the first obvious place. In verse 2 we have, "Speak to the people of Israel and say to them, when anyone brings you an offering to the Lord, you shall bring your offering of livestock from the herd or from the flock." Okay? So that's the thing, what this word offering and the verb to draw comes from the same verb as to draw near. So you want to approach the Lord, and here it is very interesting. It is Egyptians who approach the Israelites. We can, just on that, we can have probably another lesson or a series of lessons. We are not going to do that. What I want to point out is, if we'll have a time later on, in every sacrificial custom we have, or every offering we can discuss from book of Leviticus, we basically have one way or another retelling the story of Passover. Okay? So what happened during Exodus, what happened through the Passover night, what happened with Israelites in the past, it is replayed in the whole ritual, and therefore it, as what happened in the past, it should bring the worshiper through this tragic, then simultaneously salvific period of time into the glorious future. Okay? So, further on, they saw Egyptians who will approach them. We know how many Egyptians were there. If we look a little bit up there in the text, we know that he actually, the Pharaoh, in verse 7, says, "So he made ready his chariots and took his army with him, and took 600 chosen chariots and all the other chariots of Egypt with officers over them. So, why it is important? It is very interesting to see that Israelites who left roughly 600,000 men on foot, okay, plus women, plus children. There was also a multitude of other non-Israelites who followed them. They are approached by 600 plus chariots. Interestingly, Moses, if you believe that Exodus was written by Moses, deliberately puts this number, not 700, because we have it here. 700 chosen chariots and all the other, and we do not have that all other stuff. We need to compare 600 and 600, but the thing is, we have 600 chariots over 600,000 people. But these 600,000 people are in fear. That's what doesn't help them to think through properly. Yes, chariot in a good old day could be compared to modern tanks. Good old Sherman tank, kind of beats enemies into parts and pieces. But still, it's 600,000 men. So, 1,000 men per chariot. It's overwhelmingly bigger. You have overwhelmingly more power anyhow. But if you're paralyzed with fear, these 600 chariots definitely look too strong and too mighty for you to overcome. Therefore, they addressed Moses, and one of their complaints was, didn't we tell you that we don't want you to intervene in our fate? Just leave us alone. And it's actually, if you will go back into chapter 5 and 6, that's what they tell him. In chapter 5, verse 21, we find following statement. Right after first encounter between Moses and Pharaoh, when they were told, when foremans of Israelite trade union, let's put it this way, were told to make bricks without straw, the gathering of Israelites responded to Moses and Aaron, "The Lord look on you and judge, because you have made us stink in the sight of Pharaoh and his servant, and you have put a sword in their hand to kill us." So it's not exactly leave us alone, but what you did is made our life really bad. And now they are kind of coming back into that. We told you you made our life bad. Now you brought us into the wilderness to die. We will not even have fancy schmancy graves. So Moses responded to people as, fear not, stand firm, but not because you are mighty guys, you can, defeat it. You just stay firm and see, because you will see the salvation of the Lord. There is another see. There are two things that you will see. You see salvation of the Lord. Okay? And you see army of Egypt. That you will not see forever. After that. So you will see salvation, and you see army now that you will not see after salvation will be implemented. You will not see this as we have it in verse 30, and you shall not see again. But it's another form. It's not see forever. Okay? Lord will fight. Okay? That's his battle. He told you he will bring you out of Egypt. He will. So when we think about that's kind of important. It's kind of really, I would say, cool and almost sarcastic on both sides. On one hand, it is Lord who brings people out of slavery. On the other hand, it is he did not bring out of slavery a small or large, any group of people who were faithful and were happy and so on and so forth. This is not the first, this is not the last, definitely not the last moment when people will complain about getting out of Egypt and getting out of slavery. He brought from Egypt and he dragged them through the wilderness and he brought their descendants into the promised land. The people who were almost always unhappy with what he had done to them. Sorry, that's what it is. Okay, now, second part, 15 to 18. And the Lord said to Moses, why do you cry to me? Tell people of Israel, go forward, lift up your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it, that the people of Israel may go through the sea on the dry ground. And we'll talk about that. It will be implemented in next paragraph. We'll see how it's gonna go. So we'll talk. And I will harden hearts of Egyptians, so they shall go in after them, and I will get glory over Pharaoh and all his hosts, his chariots, his horsemen, and the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord when I have gotten the glory over Pharaoh, his chariots, his horsemen. So this phrase, Pharaoh, chariots, horsemen, it is repeated twice here, and it will be repeated even more times in verse 23, and then 26, and then 28, and then verse 1 of chapter 15. So with this repetition of Pharaoh, his chariots, and horsemen, I know it's probably not a great comparison, but I just it couldn't escape my mind, at least, to remember this nursery rhyme. Humpty Dumpty sat on the wall, Humpty Dumpty fell on the floor, I guess. And then the king and his horsemen and all of the army, they tried to pick up Humpty Dumpty again. Okay, so that's kind of, I don't know who wrote Humpty Dumpty, but maybe they were thinking about something like that. There's the story of the Pharaoh and his chariots and his horsemen and so on and so forth. So, as I said, we have few things here. So Moses is commanded to lift up his staff, okay, and his staff was already had primer role in some of the plagues that came over Egypt. For example, the first one starts with Moses lifting up his staff. What we have in the first plague that we have in chapter 7, verse 14. Okay, then Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh's heart is hardened, he refused to let you go, so go to Pharaoh in the morning, and as he is going out to the waters, stand on the bank of the Nile to meet him, and take in your hand the staff that was turned into serpent, and you say to him, the Lord, the God of Hebrews, sent me, saying, let my people go, that we might serve in the wilderness, and so on and so forth. So that's one of the examples where he takes his staff and stretches his arm, and something miraculously will happen. There is hardened heart, and sometimes we read the commentaries that the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, and it's kind of not fair to Pharaoh, because it is Lord who hardened his heart, and then yet he still punishes him. I think that we might reconsider the hardening of heart. It's more like being determined. Okay, so that the Lord made sure that Pharaoh is determined in what he wants to do, but he is determined into something really bad. Okay, so therefore he is punished. And the thing is, it's here when we set up the scene, what will take place in the near future, is he told Moses that Egyptians will follow Israelites into the water of the sea, and they will, everything will go really bad for them. Now, third, the angel of the Lord was going before the host of Israel. Now it moved and went behind after them. So what we have here is we basically have kind of, it looks like this. We have a sea and we have a camp of Israelites. Okay, camp. Okay. And the fiery cloud. So fire within the cloud was here. Now, it moved. Okay. Now we can take this cloud out of here. And we have this cloud here. And the reason is because we have Egyptian army approaching the camp. Okay? So why do we need it? We needed some time to handle the situation. And what will happen right there is following. Okay? Third block. 21 to 25. It's kind of like a most, I don't know, exciting one, I would say. So what happened is we have light, we have fire, we have also sea. The waters will split up and there is a dry land. So let me write it down. We have, again, fire, or not even fire, let's put it this way. We have light. Okay? And then we have sea. We have wind that split up the sea, and we have a land. I mean, if you think carefully about that, it should ring a bell almost immediately. All of this brings us into Genesis 1, verse 2 and 3. Sorry. Very beginning of creation story. And we'll have one more reference to creation in a few seconds, but right now let me read it this way. The earth, okay, the land, was formless and void, and the darkness was over the face of the deep, and the spirit of, or the same, we already talked about that. The word wind is the same as spirit. The wind or spirit of God was hovering over the face of waters, and God said, "Let there be light." So in our creation story, the light is one of the first responses to the creational narrative. Here we have the light who initiates, and that's God's presence here, who initiates three other things to act in such a way that we can have recreation, not recreation in the sense of rest, but recreation of the Israel from the bunch of slaves into the nation. So that's their initial creation step into formation of Israel as an or nation, okay, the people. There is one more thing that which parallels this story with creation motif. In verse 21, we have the strong east wind, that actually deserves another comment, made sea dry land, and the waters were divided, okay? And the people of Israel went into the midst of the sea on a dry ground, okay? The word midst, or what we have in English as midst, in Hebrew there are few different terms. One of them is like Lord is in the midst of Israel, and that's a different one. It's not what we have here. But here, what we have here is we need to again go back into Genesis 1 in verses 6 and 7. And in 6 and 7, we have God said, let there be expanse in the midst of waters, the waters above and the waters below. Okay? And let it separate the waters from waters. So the God made expanse and separated waters that were under expanse and the waters that were above expanse. And it was so, and so on and so forth. So what happened is, when we cross Red Sea, we are in the firmament. Okay? So we have day 1, day 2 motif, and okay, we have some story after that. It's very interesting to see how in the future we can trace that story into a creational paradigm. Okay? One more important thing. Just think seriously, okay? You have waters on the right hand and waters on the left hand, and the people going through. How do waters, these massive water walls, look like? They look like mirrors. Okay? Think of that. Because you look in the water and that's what the frog. The thing is, when you go through with 600,000 people and you have mirrored wall on each side, it's kind of like a multiplication. Okay? You see 600,000 men with their wives, with their children, reflecting in one side of the wall, and then it reflects on the other side of the wall, and then it reflects and reflects and reflects. You might see this effect if you will go between the walls of mirrors. You know, in some of the palaces, to make sure that the room looks bigger or larger, they put mirrors on each side of the wall and windows. So it makes the space grow. Okay, while you don't have the same, you have the same amount of space. So here you see this not only 600,000 men, it's a glorious army which is led by God. Okay, there is one more thing that I need to touch, even though we are running out of time. This mirror motif will be picked up in Exodus 38, verse. Give me a second. Verse 8. When we will come to the Sinai and we will start to build the tabernacle. In the tabernacle, the very first thing when you come into the courtyard is an altar. But when you pass altar, there is this huge basin of water to make sure that the people who approach God and their animals, their sacrifices, are clean. So we are cleaning people here, symbolically. Okay? What this basin is made of. If we go to Exodus 38, as I said, it is very interesting that the ESV, unlike many other translations, but in this particular case, the ESV, English Standard Version, does a great job. And we are talking about Bezalel, who was in charge of the project. So he made basin of bronze and its stands of bronze from mirrors of the ministering women who ministered in the entrance of the tent of meeting. So who ministered at the entrance of the tabernacle. So those women brought their mirrors. So there is this mirror motif, mirror effect that we have here. Okay? And again, we have this repetition of phrase, which is like few times brought up, that the Pharaoh's horses, Pharaoh's chariots, his horsemen, and all of these guys try to follow Israelites into the space between the walls. Two things happened. First of all, Lord looked down on them, as we have it here, from the cloud of fire. Verse 24. In the morning watch, the Lord in the pillar of fire and of the cloud looked down on Egyptian forces and threw Egyptians into panic. So before we have Israelites who fear greatly. Now these guys in panic. They are really panicking. What happened as a result is most likely chariots, especially those days, were pretty heavy devices. So even it is said it is dry land, but it's dry land for those who walk on foot. But what happened is verse 25 says that he made clogging their chariot wheels, so they could not drive properly. They would start to drive heavily. We have a parallel to that in Judges 4. We have a similar situation when army of enemies attacked Israel, and there was a heavy rain, and the road and the terrain that they used to approach Israelites became kind of muddy, and their chariots could not drive properly. So what they used to have as a beneficial feature for the army turned out into something that they was actually leading them to disaster. So same thing here. They are stuck in the middle of these walls of water, and then Moses, on the other hand, again stretches his arm, and the waters collapsed. And the thing is, whatever movie you watch, made by conservative Christians or not conservative non-Christians or whatever movie you watch about Exodus, usually Pharaoh and some of his friends get out of water. Okay, according to the scriptures, none of them survived. Unfortunately for them, fortunately for Israelites, there was no one left behind. So, thus, we'll skip through this part. Verse 30 now. Thus Lord saved the Israel on that day from the hand of Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Okay, so all of them died. And Israel saw the great power that the Lord used against Egyptians, so the people feared the Lord, and they believed in Lord and his servant Moses. And then Moses with the people sang the song. And we will read the first verse for the song. I will sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously, horse and his rider. Okay, again, that's repetition of the horse and the chariots and riders he has thrown into the sea. Okay, so with this glorious motif, we can think of many interesting parallels in the life of Jesus, and even starting with church fathers, they drew those parallels. Some of them would see the Moses stretching hand as the one who would, as Jesus who would conquer the waters of the sea, or when he would, when Moses would lead an army of Israelites going through the sea by the dry land, comparing to Jesus walking over the waters of the lake. So there are things like that, but also in other times, in other things. Right now we are going through pandemic. But even in this pandemic, we have seen some miracles of the Lord, how he would save people, how he would defend people. And I think it is important to understand that the Lord have not changed. Okay, so he is still same God who wants to save people and who wants us to be faithful to him. And as a response, we can still sing songs that glorify and praise his glorious name forever and ever. Amen. You can leave questions or comments at the bottom of this video. Stay blessed.